Your father chose me. That's what my stepmother Brenda said in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, less than 24 hours after my dad died. She had married him nearly 4 years earlier. In the last 3 weeks of his life, she blocked my phone number, kept me off his deathbed, and walked a mobile notary into his bedroom while he was on a fentanyl patch delivering 75 micrograms an hour and 4 oxycodone doses a day. The paper she was waving was a purported late December will. It claimed the house Carolina had chosen with my dad in 1991, and even the $800,000 trust he had built for me in 2017. All of it was hers. She smiled while she said it, the kind of smile a person gives when they think the witnesses have already left. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just looked at her, and I knew exactly who I had to call because my father did choose. He just didn't choose her. If this story is already hitting you the way I think it is, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It's the only way I can keep telling stories like this. And drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. I'm Adriana, 31, and this is the story of the file that hit a kitchen island the morning my stepmother thought she'd already won. Let's go back to the night my dad stopped picking up the phone. I grew up at 1418 Maple Ridge Lane in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a Cape Cod my parents bought in 1991. Carolina, my mother, painted every room herself. The kitchen island was a slab of butcher block she found at an estate sale outside Strasburg and refinished in our garage one summer. She put the cabbage rose wallpaper up over the dining alcove in 1996. She planted the dogwood by the front porch when I was a year old. Carolina died in 2015. Sudden cardiac event in the garden. I was 20. My dad was 53. We stood in the front yard for an hour before either of us could call the paramedics, because neither of us could move our hands. For 6 years after that, it was the two of us. My dad was a bridge engineer with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation for 31 years. He had calloused hands and a habit of folding paper napkins into precise squares while he was thinking. He carried Carolina's grocery list in his wallet for 2.5 years after she died. He never reused the cabinets she had labeled. He kept all her cookbooks at the height she could reach. He didn't talk about her, but he didn't pretend either. I drove down from my apartment every Sunday. My dad made coffee the way Carolina did. Too strong, no sugar. And we sat on the back porch and graded my art room lesson plans together. Sometimes he'd ask me what a particular 5th grader had drawn that week, and I would tell him. And he would listen the way he listened to engineers describe load-bearing problems. Like the answer mattered, he met Brenda at a volunteer fire department fundraiser the summer of 2021. She had been divorced for a year. She was charming. She knew how to talk to a man whose grief was still sitting in his shoulders. 6 months later, he called me on a Wednesday night and said very quietly, "Brenda and I are going to get married. I'd like you to be okay with it." I told him I was. I wasn't sure I was. But it was his life, and I was 27 years old at that point. And I'd already learned that grown daughters don't get to vote on their father's loneliness. The first time I knew something was wrong was 4 months after the wedding. A Wednesday night in July, My dad didn't pick up the phone. I called him twice. I called Brenda once. Nobody picked up. At 11 that night, I drove down anyway. I let myself in with my old key. The locks hadn't been changed yet. The downstairs was dark. The garage light was on. My dad was sitting on the workbench in the garage, in his pajama bottoms and an old PennDOT sweatshirt, holding a coffee mug with no coffee in it. The clock on the wall said midnight. He looked up when I came in. He said, "I left my phone in the bedroom. I didn't want to wake her." Then he said, "I need to tell you something." Then he didn't finish the sentence. He sat there for a long minute. Brenda's voice came from the upstairs bedroom. "Frank, did the garage door open?" And he stood up, set the mug down, and said, "It's nothing, honey. I came down for water." He looked at me. He shook his head once. I left the way I came in. I didn't push him. I should have pushed him. That was the first thing he tried to tell me. There would be more. Brenda moved into Maple Ridge in the spring of 2022. By summer, she had repainted my mother's sewing room, a color called Greige Affair, and donated the curtains. The wedding photo of my parents from 1989 came off the living room mantel and went into a shoebox in the basement. The Afghan Carolina knit during her last winter went into the same shoebox. I came down for Thanksgiving 2022. Brenda set the table for 4. My dad, herself, her son Kyle, and the empty seat I assumed was mine. It wasn't. She'd ordered ceramic chargers in beige and counted out place settings for the people she considered family. When I walked into the dining room, there was no place for me. My dad didn't say anything. He just got up, went into the kitchen, and brought out a stoneware plate from a different set. He put it next to him at the head of the table. Brenda watched, smile fixed. We ate. Nobody mentioned the plate. I should have left that night. Instead, I tried. For almost 4 years, I tried. The birthdays, the Easters, the casual stop-bys on Sunday afternoons. I tried with that particular stubborn hope a daughter of a widowed father holds on to, where you keep telling yourself, this is what he needs right now, even after you've stopped believing it. I tried until he stopped picking up the phone. Christmas of 2022. I drove down with a wrapped gift for my dad, a leather-bound journal I'd inscribed for him, the way Carolina used to do. Brenda met me at the door. "Frank's resting. He had a tough morning." She took the gift from my hands. She said, "I'll put it under the tree for him." I asked if I could just step in and say Merry Christmas. She put her hand on the door frame, the same way she would later put her hand on the door frame on Christmas Eve 2025. She said, "Not today, sweetheart. It's not a good day. We'll do New Year's." We never did New Year's. The next time I saw the leather-bound journal was on her bookshelf in the den in the spring of 2023, with no inscription page anymore. Someone had torn it out. March of 2023. My dad had the locks changed. Brenda told me on the phone. Calm voice, like she was telling me about a power outage. We had a scare with the back door. The locksmith came. We didn't make you a key because we weren't sure you still came around. I drove down that Saturday. I rang the doorbell of the house I'd had a key to since I was 11. I stood on the porch for 46 seconds. I counted because I was already counting things by then. Before my dad opened the door, he was wearing a sweater I didn't recognize. His eyes were tired, in the way someone's eyes get when they've stopped sleeping in their own opinions. Brenda stood 3 feet behind him in the foyer, with her arms crossed. He said, "Hi, sweetheart, I'm not feeling great today." That was it. I drove home with my hands cold on the steering wheel. I could have called the police. I could have called a lawyer. I could have called my dad's old college friend, Henry Brennan, and asked him whether elderly isolation by a spouse counted as something the courts could touch in Pennsylvania. I didn't. I told myself my father still had the right to choose. I was wrong. He was choosing. He was choosing the quiet. He just hadn't told me what the quiet was for. November 2023. I stopped by unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon because Brenda was supposedly at a real estate continuing its seminar in Harrisburg. My dad was alone in the kitchen, and the Bank of America statement on the counter was open. I wasn't looking. I just saw it. There was a transfer line item, $18,000 moved from their joint account into an account ending in a number I didn't recognize. I asked my dad about it. He said, "I'm sure that's a misprint." Then he picked up the statement and put it inside a kitchen drawer. That night, Brenda texted me from her own phone. "Don't make Dad more tired than he already is. He's been forgetting things. We're handling it." I took a screenshot. I labeled the file in my Photos app, Brenda, November 14th. I didn't know I was starting a folder. By December, I had 3 more screenshots. By the following Christmas, I had 11. None of them were threats exactly. They were the polite version of a knife being held under a table. The one I keep coming back to was from December 22nd, 2023. Exactly 2 years to the day before Brenda's notary visited my father's bedroom. It said, "Some daughters know when to step back. I hope you're one of them." I had already seen one warning 6 months earlier. In July of 2023, the Lancaster online business section ran a small item. Brenda's real estate license had been suspended. There had been a complaint in Mount Joy. She had represented a listing she didn't fully disclose, a foundation issue, a contract written so that the buyer's earnest money got locked up in escrow when the inspection failed. The article did not name her directly, but the broker she worked under was named, and the address was named, and 3 different neighbors had already sent me the link by lunchtime. My dad did not mention it. I waited 2 days for him to bring it up. He did not. So I did not either. In May of 2024, I drove down with my college friend Rachel. We were headed to a pottery festival in Mannheim and stopped to say hi. Brenda met us at the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade in her hand, like it was a hospitality magazine shoot. She did not invite us in. She said, "Your dad's just stepping out of the shower, sweetheart. Why don't you girls take these to go?" Rachel and I drank the lemonade in my car in the driveway. Rachel said, "Adriana, that woman doesn't want you in that house." I said, "I know." Rachel said, "When are you going to do something about that?" I didn't have an answer. I dropped Rachel at her car that night. We didn't talk for almost a year after that. She said later she didn't know how to be friends with somebody who was still pretending. June 2024. I drove down for what I told myself was a routine Sunday. I had a key to the storage area above the garage where my mother's old paintings were kept. 63 canvases she had made between 1998 and 2014, mostly oil, mostly the lake near Conestoga where my parents went on their honeymoon. I climbed the pull-down stairs. The attic was empty. Bare floorboards, one bare bulb. Brenda came up behind me on the ladder and said, very lightly, "Oh, we donated those." It was time to start fresh. My dad was sitting on the back porch the whole time. He didn't look up when I left. I did not come back to Maple Ridge for more than a year. When I finally did, it was August of 2025, and my father had a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis, and Brenda had a plan. August 12th, 2025, Brenda called me. The voice on the phone was the voice she used when she wanted to sound like a Hallmark movie. "Honey, your dad got some difficult news yesterday. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor is saying 3 to 6 months. He'd love to see you." I was in the parking lot of the art supply store off Route 30 when she said it. I drove straight to Maple Ridge. I had the bag of clay tools I'd just bought still in the passenger seat. When I got to the porch, she opened the door 6 inches and put her body in the gap. "He's resting right now, sweetheart. The painkillers make him sleep all afternoon. Come back tomorrow morning around 10. She closed the door before I could answer. I sat in my car in the driveway for 3 hours. The front curtain didn't move. The porch light didn't come on. At 6:47 p.m., I finally drove home. The first time I actually saw my father after the diagnosis was 9 days later over FaceTime. Brenda held the phone. He said 4 sentences before she said he was getting tired. He said, "Hi, sweetheart." He said, "I'm sorry about this." He said, "The doctor said 3 to 6 months, but you know me. I'm stubborn." He said, "Brenda's taking real good care of me." That last sentence didn't sound like him. It sounded like a hostage proof of life video, the kind where the captive reads from a card. His eyes weren't on the camera. They were down and to the left, like he was reading. I didn't see the card, but I knew the card was there. He never finished telling me what he wanted to tell me. I don't know what it was. I think about it every day. After that call, I started writing him letters. Real letters, on actual paper, sealed in actual envelopes, stamped, mailed from the post office in Lititz on my way to work. I wrote the first one that night. I mailed it the following Tuesday. Then, one every Tuesday after that. I sent 19 before he died. None of them reached his hands. I learned later that Brenda met the mail carrier on the porch every Tuesday at 11:30 and took the mail from his hand. On October 7th, Eileen Caldwell next door, who had known my mother since the day my parents moved into Maple Ridge, began watching from her own kitchen window and keeping what she could. In October, my dad started oxycodone for pain. By November, he had a hospice at home set up, and a registered hospice nurse named Colleen Riley was at the house 3 days a week. I learned her name from the hospice agency's voicemail receipt when I called trying to get an update. Brenda took the call when she heard me on the line and said, "He's stable, don't drive down, we have it covered." She hung up. The block started on December 15th. At 2 p.m. that day, my call to my dad's cell went straight to voicemail. The next call did too. By that night, the Verizon landline at Maple Ridge was blocking my number. I knew because I tried from a borrowed phone, and it rang clean. I tried 22 times across the next 3 weeks. None of the calls connected. I did not know then that my dad was asking for me at night. Colleen Riley later told me she heard him say my name in a half sleep on 3 separate evenings. and recorded it in her hospice notes. By January, it was too late to answer. Later, after Henry asked the carrier to preserve the account history, we learned that my dad had tried to call me 3 times before the block went on. December 2nd at 3:41 a.m., December 9th at 2:17 a.m., and December 11th at 4:04 a.m. Each call lasted less than 30 seconds. I do not pretend I know what he meant to say. I only know he was reaching for me, and somebody was making it harder for either of us to get through. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2025. I drove down to Maple Ridge with a basket of my dad's favorite shortbread cookies from the bakery on King Street and a small framed watercolor I had painted myself, a sailboat on Lake Conestoga, the kind my dad and Carolina used to rent. The porch light was on, the wreath Carolina hung the year before she died, the one I made sure to put up every December no matter who was living in the house, was nowhere on the door. There was a different wreath, a gold and gray thing that looked like it came out of a Pottery Barn catalog. Brenda opened the door in a red silk robe. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m., red silk robe. She put her hand on the door frame. She did not move to let me in. She said, "Dad's sleeping. He's had a bad day. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." She closed the door. I stood on the porch for 14 minutes. The basket got heavy in my arms. The watercolor got cold against my hip. At minute 15, I walked back down the front steps. I drove home with the cookies still in the passenger seat. That was the last time I stood outside that front door and was turned away. January 5th, 2026, 11:17 p.m. My phone lit up on the coffee table. The text was from Kyle. 3 words. "Dad's gone, sorry." That was it, no call, no follow-up. I sat in the middle of my apartment floor for 40 minutes without moving. I didn't cry. I called the hospice agency to confirm. I called the funeral home Brenda was using, Henderson, the one on East King, and told them I was the daughter. I was driving down at first light. Please do not move my father's body until I had a chance to see him. I got to Maple Ridge at 6:15 in the morning. Brenda was in the kitchen running the coffee grinder. She was already dressed. She had eye makeup on. My father was upstairs, still in the bed he died in. She had not called Henderson. She was making coffee. I went upstairs. I sat next to my dad for 20 minutes. His hands were cold and very thin. There was a paperback novel on the nightstand with a bookmark in the middle. Brenda's book, not his, and an empty fentanyl patch wrapper in the wastebasket. I sat next to him and held his hand. His hand was the hand I knew. His hand was the hand I knew. Same calluses on the same fingers. Same wedding ring he had never taken off, even 4 years into the new marriage. Same small scar on the knuckle of his left thumb from a screwdriver slip in 1998 when he was fixing the back porch railing for Carolina. I remembered being 7, asking him what the scar was. I remembered him laughing and saying, "That's the price of a porch railing, kiddo." I remembered the porch railing was the one I would, 7 weeks later, sit beside with an estate key in my pocket. When I came back down, Brenda was holding a set of car keys, counting them out. I said, "We need to plan the funeral." She looked at me over the kitchen island. "Your father chose me," she said. "You need to understand that before we plan anything else." Then she lifted the keys once as if they proved it. "We need to deal with the will first." January 6th, 10 a.m. Henderson Funeral Home, the family planning room with the floral wallpaper. Brenda sat across from me with a tan accordion folder. Kyle sat at the end of the table, looking at his phone. The funeral director, Mr. Henderson, sat with his pen ready. Brenda pulled out a clipped stack of papers and laid them flat on the table. "This is Frank's most recent will," she said, in the tone of a school principal calling a parent meeting. "He signed it on December 22nd. We had a notary out. Everything goes to me. The house, the trust, all of it. I know this might come as a shock, Adriana. He wanted to take care of me." Mr. Henderson glanced down at the page and very politely glanced back up at the wall. I picked up the first page. It read, "I, Frank Whitfield, leave all my assets, including the residence at 1418 Maple Ridge Lane and the entirety of the Whitfield Family Trust, to my wife, Brenda Marston Whitfield." The signature at the bottom was a shaky scrawl in blue ballpoint. I had been getting birthday cards from my father since I was 4 years old. I knew the way he made his F. That signature was not it. I didn't say anything. The notary's name was printed in clean block letters under the signature. Wendy Pruitt. I memorized the name and folded the page closed. Brenda took it back. I helped pick out the casket. January 8th, the funeral. There were maybe 30 people in the chapel, a few old colleagues from my dad's bridge engineering firm, a couple of guys from the volunteer fire department, the Caldwells from next door. Brenda gave a 6-minute eulogy about being chosen. I didn't speak. After the service in the foyer, she handed me a cream-colored envelope with a Hallmark border. Inside was a 30-day no trespass notice and a demand that I arrange to collect any personal property she claimed was mine. She had typed it herself in Times New Roman over a leftover Christmas border template. Mr. Henderson saw her hand it to me. He looked at the floor. I drove back to my apartment in Lititz. I lay on the floor of my living room for 3 hours, looking at the popcorn ceiling. I cried once, the first time, and then I stopped. I sat up. I told myself out loud, "Let her have it." I told myself, "It's just a house." I told myself, "He's gone. It doesn't matter anymore." I almost believed me. If you've ever stood at the back of a parent's funeral while somebody else picked through what was left of them, drop a single word in the comments, any word. I'll be reading. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so I can tell you what happened the Monday morning after, when an email from a hospice nurse named Colleen landed in my inbox, and I stopped almost believing and giving up. January 12th, 8:47 a.m. Email subject line, "I need to tell you something in person." The signature line read, "Colleen Riley, RN, Lancaster Hospice Services." I read the first line 3 times before I called the number at the bottom. We met for coffee the next afternoon at Prince Street Cafe in downtown Lancaster, the place where the steam fogged the windows. Colleen was 54, Irish-American, gray-brown hair in a low ponytail, a brown leather notebook with a rubber band around it. She set the notebook between us but did not open it. "I filed an internal concern report on December 22nd, she said. "I cannot hand you clinical records in a coffee shop, but I can tell you what I documented, and I can give a sworn statement to your father's estate counsel." She told me that at 8 that morning, my father had been heavily sedated, confused about who was in the room and unable to identify her. Brenda had arrived with a mobile notary at 2:30. Brenda had asked Colleen to leave the bedroom. When Colleen returned, my father was asleep and the notary was gone. I should have escalated it that day, Colleen said. I told myself it was not my place. It was my place. I cannot undo that. But I will not hide from it now. January 15th, Henry Brennan's office on Lime Street. He had been my father's college roommate at Penn State in 1981 and is a state lawyer for more than 20 years. He was 70 now, retired except for friends. He had a corner office in a renovated brick row house with 2 cats and 3 walls of Pennsylvania trust law treatises. He poured me a glass of water and slid a folder across the desk. Your father came in here on January 18th, 2022, he said. 2 months before he married Brenda. He signed a will leaving the Maple Ridge house and the rest of his probate estate to you. He also named me executor. Then he opened a second folder. In 2017, 2 years after Carolina died, your father funded an irrevocable trust for you, he said. $800,000. He named me its independent trustee. The trust was built to sit outside the ordinary estate, and Brenda never owned it. A late paper cannot simply reach in and take trust property away from the beneficiary it was created to protect. Henry turned his laptop toward me and opened the trust portal. December 14th, he said. Someone uploaded a request for a $50,000 principal distribution and electronically signed Frank's name from an iPad. The bank froze it because I am the only trustee authorized to approve principal distributions. I did not approve it. No money left the trust. I looked at the screen until the numbers blurred. Brenda had not only been trying to take the house, she had been testing every locked door my father had built around me. He tapped a third document. Before the March 2022 wedding, Brenda signed a premarital agreement after financial disclosure. She waived any elective share claim against the estate. I looked at the December paper Brenda had waved at me on January 6th. Henry said, "That paper does not become controlling because it has a notary stamp. Brenda can offer it for probate. But if she wants it to take the house from you, she will have to defend how it was signed, whether Frank understood it, and whether he was being pressured when she put it in front of him." He pushed the water glass closer. "But we need receipts. She's moving fast." That morning, Henry had filed the January 2022 will with the Register of Wills and asked the Orphans Court for emergency preservation relief, while Brenda's December paper was contested. He said, "That does not decide who wins. It gives us a lawful way to stop records from disappearing while the court decides what Frank actually signed and understood." January 17th, Colleen signed her sworn statement in Henry's office. She read every line. Then she looked at Henry and said, "This is true." Before she left, she asked Henry to take a sealed hospice personal effects pouch from her bag. On December 19th, she said, "Frank had a clear stretch. He gave me this envelope and asked me to make sure it reached Adriana. I logged it with a hospice office, told my supervisor, and placed it in secured personal effects. After he died, compliance released it to estate counsel. The envelope was craft paper, sealed with a small red wax circle. My name was on the front in my father's handwriting, the real handwriting. I drove home in the dark. I did not open it in the car. I sat on my living room floor and broke the seal there. Inside was a letter. written in pencil on yellow pad paper, dated December 18th. Adriana, Dad sleeps most of the time now. I wanted to tell you this while I still could. The house is yours. The trust is yours. Brenda is going to try. Don't argue with her. Go to Henry. He has everything. I'm sorry I was slow. I love you. Dad. Paper clipped behind it was a small brass key. Henry recognized it the next morning. Your dad bought a fire safe in the spring of 2025 before the diagnosis, he said. Sentry. It is in the workshop above the garage. He gave me a spare key in case anything happened. Then he held up a hand. We do not go in without authority. By Tuesday, January 20th, Henry had an emergency preservation order allowing a limited supervised retrieval of estate records from the garage workshop. A deputy sheriff stood in the driveway while Brenda was served with the order. Henry and I entered only the garage workshop. He climbed the pull-down stairs first. The safe was tucked under the eaves behind an old toolbox. Inside were 3 folders. The first was labeled Adriana for after. It contained the 2017 trust documents, photocopies of the January 2022 will, the premarital waiver, and a typed letter from my father dated November 15th, 2025, 7 weeks before he died. He had written it on old pen dot letterhead. In calm engineering prose, he listed every concern he had about Brenda's behavior since spring 2023, with dates. I read that letter in Henry's office while he stood by the window and gave me the privacy of not looking at my face. March 8th, 2023. Brenda arranged to change the locks. I did not object. Adriana was not told. November 14th, 2023. $18,000. Transferred from our joint account. Brenda says it is temporary. I asked for an explanation and did not receive one. June 2nd, 2024. Carolina's paintings removed from the garage storage. Brenda says they were donated. I did not authorize it in writing. August 12th, 2025. Brenda told me Adriana had been informed about the diagnosis. I asked to speak to my daughter. She said tomorrow would be better. November 10th, 2025. I asked Colleen whether Adriana had called. She said she could not discuss calls with me while Brenda handled the phone. I should have done more earlier. The entries did not read like a dying man trying to sound dramatic. They read like my father trying to make a bridge report out of a life he had failed to control. Dates, facts, names, what was missing, what he had not done. At the bottom of the last page, beneath a line about the safe, he had written one sentence that did not sound like engineering at all. If Adriana ever has to stand in a room with Brenda, do not let my silence be mistaken for agreement. I read that line twice. Then I read it a third time. It did not excuse him. It did not give back the Sundays he had let disappear. The Christmas Eve he had left me standing on the porch. Or the years my mother's things vanished, one box at a time. But it told me he had finally seen the shape of what was happening. I asked Henry, why didn't he just call me? Henry did not give me the kind answer. He looked down at the letter and said, because people who have lived with pressure for a long time confuse avoiding a fight with protecting the people they love. Your father waited until he was sick enough to understand how little control he had left. I hated that answer because it sounded true. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The cats moved somewhere behind the bookcases. Outside the window, a delivery truck backed up on Lime Street and beeped 3 times. Then Henry said, "This letter is not a magic key. It will not make a judge ignore the December paper, but it tells us Frank had a settled plan before the final weeks, and that he was worried about Brenda's conduct while he was still able to write it down. We build from that. We do not pretend. It fixes everything." I folded the copy once along its old crease and handed it back to him. "Then build it," I said. The second folder held 3 years of bank statements, the pharmacy pickup printouts my father had saved from his online account, and a handwritten page in which he had marked each time Brenda moved money without explaining it. The third folder held his address book, his account passwords, the Maple Ridge title papers, and a photograph of my mother taken in 1996 in the front yard, holding a pickaxe beside the newly planted dogwood. I put that photograph in my breast pocket. I have not let it leave my person since. That same afternoon, I went next door to the Caldwells. Eileen opened the door with a kitchen towel over her shoulder. She said, "I was hoping you'd come." She brought me to the kitchen and pulled a freezer bag from the refrigerator. Inside were 13 envelopes, each one addressed to Frank Whitfield in my handwriting. Every stamp was still there. Every flap was sealed. I recognized them before I touched them. The blue ink I used in September. The tiny watercolor sticker I put on the October envelopes because I thought it might make him smile. The one I mailed the Tuesday after Christmas when I wrote that I knew Brenda was keeping me out, but I was still there, still his daughter, still trying. I opened the first one at Eileen's kitchen table because it had never been opened by anyone else. It began, "Dad, I saw a little girl in art class paint the bridge you helped design. She used purple for the river. You would have told her the cables needed to hold." I had written about ordinary things because I had been trying to give him a way back to ordinary life. The next letter was about my 5th graders making paper snowflakes. Another was about the shortbread cookies I planned to bring on Christmas Eve. The last one was dated December 30th. "Dad, I do not know whether you can hear me. I'm going to keep writing until you tell me to stop." He never got the chance. "Brenda was putting your letters in the recycling bin every Tuesday morning," Eileen said. "I started taking them out in October. I could not save everyone, but I saved these." I lined the envelopes along Eileen's table in date order. 13 proof marks of a daughter trying to reach a father through a door someone else had decided to close. They were not legal magic. They did not tell a court who owned a house, but they told the truth about the last months of his life. I had been calling. I had been writing. I had not walked away. Walter came in from the garage. He was 71, wiry, a retired union electrician. "I'll sign what Henry needs," he said. "I saw her take the mail. I saw her put it in the recycling. I watched you drive away on Christmas Eve and never get through that door." By the end of January 20th, Henry had 3 independent pieces that mattered: Colleen's signed statement and the hospice concern report, the pharmacy pickup log from my father's records showing Brenda collecting controlled pain medication refills. During the same period, Colleen documented heavy sedation and confusion, and the Caldwell's sworn statement with 13 unopened letters. Henry looked at the pharmacy log for a long time before he put it into a sleeve. "This does not prove she committed a medication crime," he said. "It shows the condition your father was in while she was creating paperwork around him. It supports the record. It is not the whole case." January 21st, Henry took a sworn statement from Wendy Pruitt, the mobile notary. Wendy was 44, with a gold cross necklace and a small business operating out of a co-working space on Queen Street. Brenda had called her on December 19th and said, "My husband has already signed an updated will. The lawyer needs an acknowledgement on the signature page for the file." Brenda had sent a $200 deposit through Venmo. The December packet also contained a self-proving affidavit. Brenda and Kyle had signed it as though they had watched Frank sign or personally acknowledge the will in their presence. Wendy arrived at Maple Ridge at 2:30 on December 22nd. "My father," she said, "appeared sleepy and disoriented, but was sitting up in bed." Henry asked, "Did you see Frank Whitfield sign the document?" "No." "Did he explain, in his own words, what the document did?" "No." "Did you read it to him or ask whether he understood its effect on Adriana and his estate?" "No, Mrs. Whitfield said it was already done." Henry put down his pen. "A notary stamp does not prove a document was understood, freely signed, or executed by a person with capacity," he said. "Your statement tells us Brenda used an official-looking seal on a paper you never saw Frank execute." Wendy started crying. By the time she left, she had signed a sworn statement. January 23rd, Henry filed an emergency petition to preserve Maple Ridge and stop Brenda from transferring or encumbering the property while the probate dispute was tested. The court entered a temporary status quo order that afternoon. January 25th, Brenda listed Maple Ridge on the MLS anyway. Asking price $760,000. Patrick Doyle of Berkshire Hathaway was the listing agent. The status quo order had been served on Brenda, but she never showed it to Patrick. It did not let her transfer the house, yet she acted as though a listing could make the problem disappear before anyone asked the next question. Listing photo number 4 was the living room. Cathedral ceiling, brick fireplace, and the wedding photograph of my parents on the mantel. Carolina in a tea-length dress. My father in his only good suit. Brenda had decorated around the photograph. I zoomed in, I saved it, I sent it to Henry. January 28th. The carrier account history came back under Henry's preservation request. It showed that on December 15th, a user authenticated through Brenda's registered account profile had blocked my number on both my father's cell and the Maple Ridge landline. It also preserved the 3 short call attempts my father made to me before the block went on. No miracle iCloud trace, no dramatic hacker story, just a record of who changed the account and what happened afterward. February 14th, the Beaumonts wired $40,000 in earnest money into escrow. Brenda told Patrick Doyle that her probate paperwork would be complete before closing. Patrick accepted that story at face value. She set a public open house for Sunday, February 22nd, then scheduled a broker walkthrough, and the Beaumonts' final visit for Monday, February 23rd. Closing was supposed to happen Tuesday, the 24th. Henry looked at the calendar. "The buyer's attorney will be there Monday," he said. "That is enough." I made my decision. Her broker open was going to be my courtroom. February 22nd, Sunday night, Henry's office. Outside the window, a slow snow was starting. The file was finished. It was bound in navy linen with brass corner caps, the same kind of presentation binder Henry had used in a contested estate case years earlier. 12 numbered pages, indexed in clean type. Page 1. The certified January 18th, 2022 will naming me beneficiary of the Maple Ridge house and the probate estate. Page 2. The purported December 22nd will Brenda claimed replaced it. Page 3. The December 22nd hospice note documenting confusion, profound sedation, and Brenda's request that Colleen leave the bedroom. Page 4, Colleen Riley's signed affidavit. Page 5, Wendy Pruitt's sworn statement. Page 6, the self-proving affidavit appended to the December paper purportedly signed by Brenda and Kyle Marston, stating that Frank signed or personally acknowledged the will in their presence. Page 7. Verizon's account change history showing the block placed on my number. Page 8. The Caldwell's affidavit and 13 unopened letters Adriana had mailed to Frank, all recovered sealed from the recycling. Page 9. Brenda's premarital waiver. Page 10. The 2017 trust certificate and the failed $50,000 distribution request. Page 11. The temporary status quo order freezing any sale or transfer of Maple Ridge. Page 12. My father's December 18th letter, photocopied, certified, and stamped with the original in Henry's office floor safe. Henry closed the binder. He looked at me. Tomorrow morning you don't explain it for her. The Beaumont's attorney will understand the problem by page 4. Kyle needs page 6. Brenda will stop talking at page 7. He set the binder on the desk between us. Let the pages do what they were made to do. February 23rd, 6:30 a.m. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror in Lititz. I wore a plain white button-down shirt and black jeans. I did not wear black. I did not wear mourning. I did not wear anything Brenda could mistake for surrender. I tied my hair back. I put on the gold studs my mother had given me for my 13th birthday. I drove to Henry's office. He came out of the front door in a charcoal suit and a navy tie, the binder under his arm. We took his Audi A6. He drove. Neither of us spoke until we were on Route 30. Halfway there, he said, "If she calls you a name, you don't react. If she throws a coffee cup, you don't react. If she falls apart, you don't help her. This is not the day for grace. This is the day for the truth." I said, "Okay." Before Henry picked me up, I drove the long way to his office. I stopped at the cemetery on Mulberry Street, where we had buried my father 6 weeks before. The sun was just up. The marker was a flat granite plaque. Brenda had refused to pay for the full headstone Carolina had picked out for them years earlier when they had bought the plot together. I crouched down. I touched the engraving. I said, "I'm going to do it today, Dad, the way you laid it out." I didn't cry. I had not cried since the night I read his letter. I had decided I was not going to give Brenda the sight of my eyes wet. I stood up. I went back to the car. I drove to Lime Street. We turned onto Maple Ridge Lane at 10:53 a.m. There was a broker open house sandwich board on the curb, 3 cars in the driveway. The Beaumont's black Tahoe, Patrick Doyle's white Mercedes, and a silver sedan I assumed belonged to the Beaumont's attorney. The dogwood Carolina, planted 30 years earlier, was bare and still snow-dusted. Henry parked behind the Mercedes. I took the binder from his back seat. We walked up the front porch steps together. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pine sol and somebody's idea of warmth. There was a tray of chocolate chip cookies on the granite island. A coffee carafe stood beside a small white card that read, "Brewed fresh." Brenda stood behind the island in a navy silk blouse and a triple strand of pearls, her hair pulled into a low chignon. Kyle sat on the piano bench in the living room, soft jazz coming from the Sonos speaker. Patrick Doyle was at the bar counter, explaining the cathedral ceiling to the Beaumonts. Their attorney, Mark Lattimore, stood near the bay window with his arms behind his back. At exactly 11 o'clock, I walked to the kitchen island and placed the navy binder on the granite. Brenda saw me. Her smile froze for 1 second, then smoothed out. "Oh, Kyle's little stepsister has stopped by. I'm sorry, Adriana. You really should have called. We didn't pack the rest of your things yet." I said nothing. Henry opened the binder, slowly. Page 1 came up, the January 18th, 2022 will, with the certified copy seal in red ink along the bottom margin. Brenda read it upside down. She got as far as the heading, "Last Will and Testament of Frank Whitfield, sole beneficiary of residence at 1418 Maple Ridge Lane, Adriana Whitfield." Her face went a half shade lighter than her pearls. Patrick stepped closer and put on his reading glasses. "I'm sorry, whose document is this?" Mark Lattimore picked up page 1. He read it for what I counted as 18 seconds. Then he looked at me. "Are you Adriana Whitfield?" I nodded. He turned to the Beaumonts. "You two are going to want to sit down for a minute," Brenda said, fast. "That's an old will. There's a newer one. December 22nd. I have it." Henry turned to page 2. "Yes," he said quietly. "Let's look at December 22nd. The purported will lay there in clean black type and a shaking blue signature. Henry turned to page 3. Mark leaned in and read the first line aloud. "Patient confused, heavily sedated, unable to identify hospice nurse at 8 a.m. Spouse arrived with mobile notary at 2:30 p.m. Requested nurse, leave room." Brenda's hand came off the granite. "He had good moments," she said quickly. "He chose me. He told me he wanted to take care of me." Henry turned to page 4, Colleen Riley's affidavit. Mark read the paragraph in silence. Mrs. Beaumont sat down on a bar stool. Kyle stood up from the piano bench and walked into the kitchen. Henry turned to page 5. Wendy Pruitt's sworn statement said she had not watched Frank sign the December paper, had not read it to him, and had never heard him explain what it did. Mark lowered the page. "Mrs. Marston," he said, "this is not a clean estate transaction. It is a contested document with serious execution and capacity concerns." Brenda said, "The notary saw him. The notary signed it. She's a professional." Henry turned to page 6. It was the self-proving affidavit appended to the December paper. Brenda and Kyle were named beneath language, stating that Frank had signed or personally acknowledged the will in their presence. Kyle put his index finger on his own printed name. He read it once, then again. He looked up at Brenda. "Mom, you put me on a sworn page. You told me he was sitting up. You told me he had read the document. You told me my name was just for the file." Brenda started. "Kyle, sweetheart, this isn't—" "You used my name," he said. "You knew he was sick. You knew he didn't know what was happening." Mark looked directly at Kyle. Mr. Marston, are you prepared to repeat that under oath? Kyle took 3 breaths. Then he nodded. Brenda put her right hand on the granite island. The diamond ring on her finger tapped twice against the stone. Henry turned to page 7. The Verizon account history showed the block placed on my number at 1433 on December 15th. Both my father's cell and the Maple Ridge landline. Mark read the line. Then he looked at Brenda. You blocked his daughter's number during the final weeks of his life? Brenda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Henry turned to page 8. The Caldwell's affidavit. 13 unopened envelopes I had mailed to my father, all still sealed. Mr. Beaumont looked toward Patrick Doyle. Mr. Doyle, he said politely, my wife and I are going to need an explanation. Patrick swallowed. I had no idea. Henry turned to page 9. Brenda's premarital waiver. Her initials. Her signature. Her acknowledgement that she had received financial disclosure. Henry turned to page 10. The 2017 trust certificate and the frozen $50,000 distribution request. Mark read both pages. His face changed. The trust is not available to you, he said to Brenda, and the house cannot close while estate authority is disputed. Henry turned to page 11. The temporary status quo order. Mark read it for 6 seconds, looked up and turned to the Beaumonts. Closing tomorrow is not happening. I need you both to step outside to my car. We are going to discuss your escrow deposit and your options. The Beaumonts nodded. Patrick Doyle followed them toward the side door, face the color of cold milk. Brenda stood in the kitchen alone. The granite island, the coffee carafe, the tray of cookies someone had baked that morning, the pearls at her throat. Her right hand opened. The set of brass keys with the leather tag that read Whitfield Residence came loose from her fingers. They hit the oak floor my father had laid in 1991, 4 years before I was born. Henry bent down before I could. He picked the keys up and slipped them into the binder. These remain with the estate pending the hearing, he said. Kyle was already at the front door, putting on his coat. He did not look back at his mother. I walked past Brenda. Henry closed the binder. We left. 2 days later, February 25th, I drove back to Maple Ridge by myself. Henry met me at the front porch. Brenda's new lawyer had signed a written possession agreement that morning. The listing was withdrawn. Brenda had surrendered the house keys to Henry, agreed not to remove or alter estate property, and agreed not to interfere while the probate dispute was resolved. She had packed 3 suitcases and left the day before. Her clothes were gone from the upstairs closets. Her makeup was gone from the bathroom counter. The wedding photograph of my mother and father from 1989 was still on the mantel, exactly where it had been in the MLS listing. Henry handed me one brass key with a small inventory tag tied to it. Estate key, he said. Use it to care for the house. The paperwork will finish in its own time. I opened the front door. The wallpaper Carolina hung over the dining alcove was still there, sun-faded, but still there. The butcher block island where the binder had landed had a faint coffee ring on it that I left alone. The kitchen drawer where my dad had hidden the November 2023 bank statement was empty now, except for a rubber band and a Lancaster County Library bookmark. I opened the basement door. The shoebox with the wedding afghan was where Brenda had left it, under the workbench in the corner. I carried it upstairs. I unfolded the afghan on the back of the living room couch the way my mother used to. The wool still smelled faintly of cedar. I walked upstairs. I opened the door of my mother's old painting studio. Empty. Bare floorboards. One bare bulb. But the window still looked out over the dogwood. I sat on the floor for a long time. I made a list in my head of the paintings she had made there and the order I remembered them in. I did not know what I expected to feel. I felt clean, which was not what I was supposed to feel, and I let myself feel it anyway. My phone buzzed. "Henry, Brenda's new lawyer confirmed she will not oppose the trust or the possession agreement. The probate file will finish in its own time." Then a second buzz. "Kyle, 2 lines. I'm sorry, tell me what I can do." I read it twice. I did not answer. Not yet. I would eventually, but not yet. If you've ever held silence while somebody tore your family apart in front of you, and you waited, and you let the receipts come in their own time, leave one word in the comments tonight. Any word. I'll be reading. And if your dad's quietness ever sounded like my dad's quietness, you weren't alone. He wasn't slow. He was just waiting for you to be ready. I went back downstairs. I stopped in the living room. The wedding photo from 1989 was still on the mantel. I took it down. I held it. I looked at my mother's face. 26 years old in that picture, 6 years before she had me, and 2 years before my parents bought this house. I put the photo back, this time at the center of the mantel, the way it had been before Brenda moved in. I went to the basement, found the shoebox of Carolina's things, brought up 4 more photos, and put them along the mantel. By the time I was done, the mantel looked the way it had in 1996. I stood back. I nodded once. I opened the front porch door. The afternoon sun was over the Caldwell's roofline, going orange. Eileen was out by her mailbox. She looked up, saw me, and waved. I waved back. I sat down on the top step where my father used to sit when he came in from the garden. I pulled my father's letter out of the breast pocket of my shirt. The craft paper, the broken red wax circle. I read it for the 3rd time. "The house is yours, the trust is yours. I'm sorry I was slow." I folded it. I looked at the dogwood my mother planted when I was 1. I said it out loud just once to no one but the porch and the tree and the slow Lancaster sun. "You weren't slow, Dad. You were just quiet long enough that I could be the one to speak."